there. None.
Test. There we go. Okay, Shabbat Shalom again. And I want to talk about this afternoon. Pastor Sam had asked me to talk about the pronunciation of YHWH. And I didn't know it a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago, a year and a half ago. Some of the leaders in the Sacred Name movement were contacting me and telling me that in the States there's, I guess, a disagreement on how the name YHWH is pronounced, and there's certain teachers that are not Messianic teachers, they're actually Jewish, that are teaching the name should be Yehovah. I know several years back I dealt with the name Yahuwah. That was another thing that came up from somebody else. So Pastor Sam had asked me if I would go over this today, and I put a PowerPoint together. I also did we did some TV programs with YRM a couple of weeks ago on the same subject, because I do think it's important. It's extremely important, because part of the restoration ministry is Yahweh's name being restored. So it's not enough to just say, yes, I know his name is important. As a matter of fact, I came from a congregation called Church of God. Some people here maybe came from the same, where they used to say that the Creator's name is very important, but then they never used the Creator's name. So we believe it's important. We really believe it, that the name Yahweh is important. So I want to go over that today, and I want to start by saying that up until maybe 10, 15 years ago in the internet age, and maybe I'll stand until I get to the PowerPoint so my back isn't to you. Up until the internet age of about 10, 15 years ago, there really was no contesting that the Creator's name was Yahweh. I would say overall scholarship, at least 80% of scholarship believed it. Today in Israel, probably 50 to 60% of scholarship will say it's Yahweh, and then maybe the other 40% will say we can't be 100% sure. But hardly anybody will come up with some of these names that you're seeing today, the name Yahuwah or the name Jehovah. In some of the literature I have, you'll see that in the encyclopedias, they say that it's actually an impossibility, because according to Hebrew grammar, which I'm going to show you today, you can't come up with those names. So I know recently, I don't know if you heard this, but somebody who is teaching the name Yehovah came out and said he found 1,000 different manuscripts proving that it's Yehovah. And my first question is, when are those manuscripts from? Because what I want to show you is not manuscripts from the last 100 years or the last 500 years or even the last 1,000 years. I want to show you back in biblical times. I want to show you 2,000 years ago and 2,500 years ago how we know the name was Yahweh. So it's almost like I make the analogy, it's like a Sunday pastor saying, I can prove to you Sunday is the Sabbath. I'll go out here and show you 1,000 Sunday-keeping congregations that are keeping the Sabbath on Sunday, and that proves that the Sunday... Of course not. That doesn't mean anything. We know that most of these Christian churches are deceived. So finding manuscripts from medieval times really proves nothing. And the question that I'm going to ask you, I'm going to tell you certain questions to ask people who are using any name but Yahweh, particularly Yehovah, to ask them to show you just one, not 100, not 1,000, show one proof before modern vowel pointing, which is 8th, 9th century AD, to show the name Jehovah or Yehovah. There's zero. There's absolutely none. There's absolutely none. And a matter of fact, we know from the Talmudic records going back to the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, we know in the Talmud that the rabbis actually said that not to use the name Yahweh, that they took the vowels of Adonai or Elohim, it depends, and they put them into the Tetragrammaton to come out with the erroneous Yehovah. So we know that. It's not a secret. They've said that. As a matter of fact, in what's called the Masoretic text. Masoretic means vowel-pointed text. And there's two main texts that are vowel-pointed I'm going to go over. One is the Leningrad Codex, and one is the Aleppo Codex. With people that are supporting the Aleppo Codex and saying it's the next best thing since sliced bread, what they don't tell you is, in the Aleppo Codex, most of the Torah is missing. We only have from the middle of Genesis till the second part of Deuteronomy. So the most important part of the Tanakh, the Torah, is almost gone in the Aleppo Codex. So I don't think they can really use that. But in those vowel-pointed manuscripts, you actually have 7 different ways to vowel point it. And the Yehovah is only there in the Aleppo Codex 7 times. So out of 6,823 times, that vowel pointing is only there 7 times. So let's go into a little bit of the PowerPoint. That's the name in English, Yod, He, Wav, He. The other thing I want to go over is the Wav, that it is a Wav and not a W and not a V. And this is how you would pronounce it in English. The Y would be Ya, the H would be Ha, the W would be W, U, or U, depending on if it's a vowel or consonant, and then of course the H again is H. Now, one thing that we should do when we're looking at any word in Hebrew, Hebrew is a great language because every name, every word in Hebrew goes back to a 2 or 3 letter root word. So when you're looking to see what names mean, it's important to go to the roots. And a matter of fact, when you're looking at translations, one way that you can understand the context of the translation is to understand the root word. I'll give you an example. In the book of Genesis, right, we see from Genesis 3, as soon as Adam and Eve sin, and Yahweh is, giving them their curses, he also gives redemption at the same time. And he says that a seed, Genesis 3:15, is the first messianic prophecy, the seed of the woman compared to the seed of the enemy. And he says that he will bruise your heel, but you will crush his head. And then what's interesting, now there's a messianic prophecy. So now Adam and Eve are believing they are going to have the Messiah. The Messiah is going to be born. So in the very next chapter, it says that Adam knew his wife Eve and conceived and bore a son. And what did they call him? Cain, or in Hebrew, Cain. Now, why would they call him Cain? Because the root word for Cain, it's the word to purchase, to redeem. If I was going out to the supermarket here and I was buying bread, I'd say, ani kanati, I'm buying. So that's the word for buying, purchasing. So that's the word Cain. So they're thinking he is the redeemer. Now it says she continued to bear his brother, and what's his name? Abel, or Havel in Hebrew. Havel means vanity, nothingness. Because the prophecy is only for 1, not 2. So when you understand the Hebrew roots, everything of the story makes more sense. And that's why when we read the story, we see Abel as the good guy and Cain as the bad guy, and that's the way it turned out, but not when they were born. When they were born, Cain, in the eyes of Adam and Eve, was the purchased redeemer, and Havel was just the second guy there. He just happened to, be the one that we didn't need. So the Hebrew roots really help. So now when we look at the root of the name Yahweh, there's 2 roots that come from that name, could be. One is Haya, Strong's 1961, to exist, to be, to come to pass, which makes sense. That's where the expression comes in Genesis 3, I am that I am. Haya Asha Haya, I am that I am. So that is not Yahweh's name, but what happens? Moses comes to Yahweh and says, when I come to the children of Israel and say that the Elohim of your fathers has sent me, they'll ask me, what is his name? So the functional way of thinking as an Israelite is they tell you what they do before they tell you who they are. So that's what Yahweh is doing. He's using a Hebrew idiom to say, I am. You don't need to know my name. I am. I exist. That's what I do. But at the same rate, I'll still give you my name. Because then in the next verse, he says, my name is Yahweh. And this is my name for all generations. So in Scripture, we have many titles for the Creator. El Elyon and El Shaddai, the Almighty. But there's only one name. So if people tell you, well, God has many names, that's not true. That's not true. He has one name. And that name is YHWH. He has many titles, but he has one name. The next one, here we go. The next root is Yahweh, which is a verb, and it means to constitute, to bring into being, or fulfill a promise or covenant. So again, it fits the character of Yahweh. He's a covenant Elohim, and that's why this is a verb. Some people think the name should be Yahweh because of that, but no. Some verbs in Hebrew, or root words, let's say roots, you can come up with 151 different variations of that root. And that's why in our Hebrew Roots Bible, it's the only Bible I know who's done this, We personify Yeshua in the Tanakh, where I believe they're prophesying about him. So, but in many cases, and that's why we put a little asterisk, because in many cases it's a verb or it's an adjective. So it's not literally the name Yeshua that we know, but it's the word salvation in the context of the Messiah bringing that salvation. And I try to point it out so people understand that. It has nothing to do with the spelling of his name. It has to do with the prophecy of who he is. And it's important for that. So when we're looking at the root word of Yahweh's name, now, Yehovah, what is the root word of Yehovah? Hova. Ruin, destruction, mischief. And I find it very interesting because one man who is promoting this Yehovah, and I know that YRM has done things, the Yehovah deception. And here it is, it really is a deception because the very name means mischief, ruin, destruction, deception. Hova means deception. So, if from the name of something we tell what it is, why is Moses named Moshe? Because he was drawn forth from the water. Every name has meaning. Even Nabal is a son of worthlessness. What does Nabal mean? Worthless. Every name in Scripture means what the person is doing. So Yahweh's name certainly would not be ruin and mischief. But I believe some of them are doing this in a deceptive manner. Because some of them know. They know this. But the same way I've said before, that you know what? Maybe why many people don't know the name Yahweh is because every second of every day, people are out here saying G-O-D with a curse word. And yet the third commandment says, whoever takes the name of YHWH in vain will not be held guiltless. So maybe it's out of mercy that Yahweh keeps the world. It says in Romans 11:32, he keeps them all in unbelief to have mercy on them all. Maybe he's having mercy that the world doesn't know his name. But when it comes to the Jews, and you know it when you're in Israel, because I've done it before, I've said the name Yahweh in front of Jews, and they get jittered. And they'll say, don't say that name in front of me. And I try not to. I don't want to offend them, so I'll say I'm sorry. I won't say a fake name, but I won't say it. There was one time, it was a Friday evening, we were having a Erev Shabbat meal at a person's house, a Jewish house on Friday, and they asked me to do the reading in Yeshaya, Isaiah. So I did the reading, and as I'm reading, I'm saying the name Yahweh. And the woman says, why are you saying that name? And I said, well, that's the name that's here. And she says, don't say that name. And I said, well, I can either stop reading, or I'm going to say the name, but I'm not going to insert a pagan title in the place where our Creator's name goes. It's that simple. So I don't want to offend our Jewish brother, but at the same rate, I'm not going to change the name. But very clearly, that is not our Heavenly Father's name. Let's go to Jeremiah 16. In verse 14. Because, one of the things why, beside the fact that Yahweh's the Creator, and we should honor his name and give that name more glory than any name in heaven and earth, and then Yeshua's name next to his. One of the things why the name is important is it's also part of the restoration ministry, like I talked about today, that beside Yahweh redeeming the nation of Israel and redeeming mankind and redeeming Jerusalem, the very restoration of Yahweh's name in this is that Yahweh gets all the credit for what he's doing. So, in Jeremiah 16 and verse 14, it says, so behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that it shall no more be said, as Yahweh lives, who brought up the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but rather as Yahweh lives, who brought up the sons from the land of the north and from all the lands where he had banished them to. And I will bring them again to their land that I gave to their fathers. And then if you go to verse 21, he says, therefore, behold, I will make them know this time, I will cause them to know my hand and my might, and they will know that my name is Yahweh. So this is part of the restoration. And I'll tell you a short story. About 10 years ago, when the government approached me, they came to one of our Feast of Tabernacles, and they said, we like what you're doing there, we'd like to start supporting you. How can we help you? And that's what started me going to the Knesset and going to meetings. In one of the first meetings, they said to me, the only thing is you have to change the name of your congregation because it's offensive to Jewish people. So I told them, I said, let me just explain one thing. The day I change the name of this congregation is the day I'm not in Israel anymore. Because it's Yahweh's work. It's not Don Esposito Ministries, it's Congregation of Yahweh. And He gets all the glory. So I can't change the name of the congregation. Yeshua said, keep the congregation in the Father's name. And that's why we have assembly, congregation. It means it's the same meaning, but it's of Yahweh, because Yahweh is getting the glory of this. So that's part of the restoration. And part of the restoration also, as we know, as I'll show you in a little bit, is that if you give honor to the Father, you have to give honor to the Son. And we know that. And Yeshua said, you can't know the Father without the Son. So would it make sense in the time of restoration, where Yahweh is restoring all things through His congregation, that a anti-missionary, non-Jewish person is going to come up with the right pronunciation of the Creator's name? That they don't even believe in saying it. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. So, again, there's, the motives I'll leave out for now, but I don't believe all the motives with the people that are against the name Yahweh are good. And I believe a lot of times they're trying anything to purposely stop us from using that name. So, they're trying to get people to believe it's something else. You hear these things, Yahweh is the name of a pagan deity. And it's absolutely ridiculous, because there's absolutely zero evidence of that anywhere. There's no pagan deity anywhere in the world where you see the name Yahweh that's underneath that deity. So let me just read to you a few proofs here of the name Yahweh before vowel pointing. This is coming from Theodoret of Cyprus. It's a 5th century AD manuscript that says the Samaritans of his time spoke the sacred name of Yahweh. I believe that form from historical and archaeological evidence is the closest that comes to pronunciation of the sacred name of Yahweh is phonetically pronounced Yahweh, like we say it. In 1898, A.H. Sauce transliterated 3 cuneiform tablets dating back to the time of Hammurabi, and it clearly says Yahweh is Elohim. That's from Haley's Bible Handbook, page 62. And here is something very interesting, that this is actually a stone from Solov, South Sudan. And over here it talks about the Shashu of Yahweh. And again, because it's not in Hebrew, the vowel pointing is not contested. But this stone was actually made in 1400 BC, which means it's one generation after the Exodus, right? So when the Exodus happened, we know the Egyptians knew the name of Yahweh. There's no doubt in their mind, because that's what happened. Every single time Moses came, he came in the name of Yahweh, and he did each of the plagues. So to think about it, we actually have a stone that is only one generation after the Exodus that clearly pronunciates the Creator's name as Yahweh, the people of Yahweh. So that's not coming from something that's a medieval manuscript or something else. This is coming from exactly during that time. Maybe I'll just go back to there a second. Okay, just leave that up for a second. I want to quickly, I'm not going to take too much time, but I just want to go into showing why the 6th letter of the alphabet was a Wav originally and not a Vav, that came later. And I'll read you here from something called Lev Tehor. It's a Jewish publication. It says most Semitic scholars transliterate Wav as a W or a U, depending on the school and pronunciation, because remember, the 6th letter of the alphabet can be a vowel or a consonant, depending on where it is in the word. The Vav and the use of the V did not originate until much later. Evidence suggests in ancient times this letter had a Wa, a W sound, and was called Wav instead of Vav. In Aramaic and also Arabic, related languages in Hebrew, this letter also has a Wav sound. And today, in both those languages, it's still the Wav. It never changed. And some people debate if Aramaic might have come before Hebrew. We don't know that. Aramaic could have come first. They're sister languages. but certainly that the Aramaic certainly has the wav sound. This letter was also used in ancient times to represent the vowels of U and O. These two sounds are closely related to the sound W, suggesting an original W sound. So, like we say, it's double U, it's not double V. And I'll be honest with you, you'd really have to look hard. A matter of fact, I don't think I've ever met a scholar who doesn't agree with this. It's not something that 50% say it was a wav and 50% say it was a vav. I've never met a scholar that doesn't agree that in ancient times it's a vav. Because the Yemenites, who actually have the oldest tradition of Hebrew, and you could even go online and you could hear them singing, because in the vowel-pointed Tanakh, they actually have the notes for singing, and you could hear them singing. And every Jew in Israel agrees that they have the closest pronunciation of ancient Hebrew, the way that they sing. And they don't use, even today they don't use a vav. They still use the wav. I'm friends with the Samaritans. The priest up there is a good friend of mine. They use the wav, and the Samaritans have always used the wav. They claim to have the oldest Tanakh in the world. They claim it's more than 3,000 years old. And when they're reading it, he only reads it with was. He does not use the V, because that's something that came much later. David Lipowich, the zoologist and professor of Hebrew Bible scholar and public lecturer, in Bible Hebrew, the sixth letter, he says, was a wav, and was pronounced as a W when used as a consonant, and either an O or a U when used as a vowel indicator. It has nothing to do with German. The sound is reconstructed based on other related Semitic languages of the day, and based on transliteration of the biblical text into Greek. The letter name comes from its original appearance as a stylized metal nail, for which the Hebrew word is wav. So remember, before there was an alphabet, there was a hieroglyphic language. So originally Hebrew was 22 pictures. And when you take those pictures and you put them together, that's how words are formed. Like the word in Hebrew for father is Abba. It's the Aleph, which is a picture of an ox, and the Bet is a picture of a house. So the father is the strength of the family. So you can do that with any word. You don't even have to know Hebrew. If you just take the 22 pictures, take the Hebrew letters, and look at the pictures, you can come up with it. And it's really interesting. Like the word for repentance. The word picture literally says to destroy the path to the house. You leave nothing to go back for. So it's really neat to look at some of these things when you're looking at there. So the sixth letter, the picture of it, of a wav, was literally a nail. That's the picture of the sixth letter of wav. Arabic's wav is a wav, just as in the older Hebrew and Samaritan Hebrew, and also in the Aramaic. They, like Greek, do not have a vav. There isn't even a vav in that alphabet. Some scholars have theorized that the V came from the Indo-European languages that derived from Sanskrit, which does have a V. So again, that probably came much, much later, maybe in the year 1000, even later than that, which it came from Indo-European languages. In biblical Hebrew, Samaritan Hebrew wav was a W. Greek did not have a V, neither did Akkadian, Arabic, or Ethiopic. So every Semitic language, and what do I mean by Semitic language? Semitic languages are all the ones that go from right to left. Why do they go from right to left? Because before we had pens and inks, you had to hit with a hammer, right? So most people are right-handed, so you would start on the right side. Every Semitic language has a wav. None of them. There's not one Semitic language that has a V sound. They all have the w sound. Edward Horowitz, in his book, How the Hebrew Language Grew, states the sound of wav a long time ago wasn't vav at all, but was the w, the weak W. The Yemenite Jews of Arabia, who retained an ancient, correct, and pure pronunciation of Hebrew, still pronounce the w as W, as does Arabic and also Aramaic, a close sister language. And that comes from Horowitz's book, page 29 and 30. And even Persian, ancient Persian, only has a wav. Only later Persian, maybe from the 7th, 8th, 9th century onward, do they have the v sound. So every ancient Semitic language. So this is what I'm saying, that sometimes people hear something from a so-called scholar without checking out his credentials, but it really doesn't matter the person's credentials. What matters is if it's true or not. And at the end of the day, it simply is not true that in ancient Israel they used the sixth letter of the alphabet as a V instead of a W. You know, that's any Hebraic roots class, or even ancient Hebrew class, they'll always tell you that that's the way it was. So now, next, I want to go into a little bit of Jehovah or Yehovah to show you that it's actually not only incorrect, but it's an impossibility. It's actually impossible to come up with that name. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes here. First, this is coming from Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. It says, Jehovah, false reading of the Hebrew Yahweh. That's from 1973 edition, Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary. Encyclopedia Americana. Jehovah, erroneous form of the name of God of Israel. That's Encyclopedia Americana, volume 16, 1972 edition. Encyclopedia Britannica. The Masoretics who from the 6th to the 10th century worked to reproduce the original text of the Hebrew Bible placed the vowels of the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh with the vowel signs of Adonai or Elohim. Thus the artificial name Jehovah or Yehovah came into being. And that's under the name of Yahweh in the New Encyclopedia Britannica, volume 12, 1993. The Jewish Encyclopedia, Jehovah or Yehovah, a mispronunciation of the Hebrew Yahweh, the name of, they put G-O-D. The pronunciation of Jehovah is grammatically impossible. This is coming from the scholars, the sources. The New Jewish Encyclopedia, it is clear that the word Yehovah is an artificial composite. That's the New Jewish Encyclopedia, 1962. The Encyclopedia Judaica. According to the Encyclopedia Judaica, page 680, volume 7, the true pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton, which means 4 letters, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, was never lost. The name was pronounced Yahweh. It was regularly pronounced this way at least until 586, which is clear from the Lachish letters written shortly before this date. And the Encyclopedia Judaica, page 680, Macmillan Press, 1971. The true pronunciation of the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was never lost. Several early Greek writers of the Christian church testify that the name was pronounced Yahweh. So, again, you're looking at the scholarship. All the scholarship is saying that Yehovah is an impossibility. Now, why are they saying that? This is what I want to show you why it's an impossibility. Here's the Tetragrammaton, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So, like I said, in Hebrew, most vowels are understood. They're not put in there. In the 8th, 9th century AD, they started putting markings, dots, as we'll see in a couple of minutes here. But there are vowels. There actually are vowels in Hebrew. Matter of fact, each of these letters, depending on where it's placed in the word, could be a vowel. And Josephus actually said that the Tetragrammaton could be 4 vowels. Because remember, a vowel is an action word, which makes it alive. And I think he's trying to make the comparison that everything about Yahweh is living. So it could be, the Yod could be E, and the He could be Ah, and the W could be U, and the H is A. So it could be Yahweh. Yahweh. So if you use them as 4 vowels, it would be Yahweh. Yahweh, which sounds like Yahweh. And Josephus said this. You would never come up with Jehovah or Yehovah that way. But with these 4 vowels, depending on where the Wav is placed, it tells you if it's a consonant or a vowel. So here you have, right, you have a Yod-Heh, which is 1 syllable. And we know what that syllable is because all over Scripture, 68 times, the name is Yah. It starts with Yah. It doesn't start with Yeh. It starts with Yah. I'll read maybe just one scripture here, but at the end maybe I'll quote a few. But I think it's in Isaiah 12 and verse 2. He says, Behold, El is my salvation, Yeshua. I will trust and not be afraid, for my strength and my song is Yahweh. Yea, he has become to me salvation, or Yeshua. So very clearly, 68 times, the beginning of that is Yah. So there's no question that it's Yah. So now, if that's 1 syllable, that means the position of the Wav is the first position of the 2nd syllable, so it would not be a vowel. It couldn't be a vowel. To be a vowel, it would have to be between 2 consonants. The Wav would never start as a vowel. So, which means it would have to be the Wav, not the U sound. So, now, let's go to the next slide here. What they're saying is because in modern Hebrew, and I stress this that it's modern Hebrew, many names do start with Yeho. YHWH, Jehoshaphat. In modern Hebrew, but I'm going to show you, I don't believe that's the way it was in ancient Hebrew, because I'm going to show you an ancient text that does not start this way. But if they're correct, let's just say for a minute they're correct, and the Tetragrammaton does start with Yeho, already you're using 3 letters of the 4 in the Tetragrammaton, right? Because it's Yeh is the Yod, and Ho would be H, and they're using the O as a U sound, which is the Wav. So the beginning you're having here, Yeho, they're already using 3 of the 4 letters. But then they say it's Yehovah. So now they're using another Wav and another Hey. So instead of a Tetragrammaton, it becomes Yod, Hey, Wav, Wav, Hey. So that's why everything you read says it's an impossibility, because you'd have to add another letter there. There's no way of getting that without adding another letter. Vowel points did not come into being to at least the 7th or 8th century in the Masoretic text. So before vowel pointing, there's no way you're going to come up with Yehovah for Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. Now, I'm going to prove the point with using 2 words here. This word is Elohim, right? And on the top is the Hebrew, the bottom is this English translation. This is from the Masoretic text. So this is a text that has vowel pointing. I told you, Masoretic text is vowel pointing text. There's text like the Dead Sea Scrolls that has no vowel pointing because it's much, much older. So Dead Sea Scrolls is 2nd century BC. This is 1,000 years later. This is 8th, 9th century AD. But look at something very interesting here. The word Elohim, right? When it's vowel pointed, there's no vav. Because you see that little dot on top of that's called the lamed, the 2nd letter, right? The first is aleph, and the second one is a lamed. In that lamed, there's a little dot on the top. That dot is called a holam in Hebrew. That dot is the U sound. So in modern Hebrew, you could take Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey and come up with Yehovah. Because if you put a dot on top of the Vav, that acts as a letter, right? So that's why here, you don't see a Vav. There is no V there. It's L-O, the Vav is there. Look in the bottom. L, and you don't see an O, you see the dot. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, look how it is. In the Dead Sea Scrolls before vowel pointing, how would we know that there's supposed to be a Vav there without the dots? How would you know? You can't. And that's my point. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's not a dot. There's actually a Vav. There is the Vav there. Elohim. This is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's look at another word. This is the name Yaakov, right? So the same thing. On the kuf, above the kuf, you see a little dot, and that dot takes the place of the Vav. So on the bottom, you have Yah, and it would just be Yaksh. But that little dot tells you there should be an O there, Yaakov. Again, we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there's no dotting system, there is a Vav there. So what that tells you there, before the vowel pointing system, you couldn't just put a dot because they didn't exist. You had to put the letter. So if it's Yehovah, you would have to have Yod, Hey, Wav, Wav, Hey. There's no other way to come up with Yehovah before the vowel system without putting the second. And that's why every single encyclopedia will say it's an impossibility. You can't come up with that name with those 4 letters before the vowel pointing system. And that's why I say, if somebody tells you, I got 1,000 manuscripts from medieval times that say Yehovah, if you believe that, I got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter with vowel pointing. That's 1,000 years later at the earliest. What we want to know is, how was it pronounced before the vowel pointing? And before the vowel pointing, like I said, you had to put the letter in. That's the only way to do it. Now, also in modern Hebrew, they have contraction laws, which means, I was telling you, that they say, well, the name has to start with Yeho, because if you look in the Bible, you have YHWH, you have Jehoshaphat, they all start with Yeho. But that is only a modern grammatical law of Hebrew. It has nothing to do with a name that's placed. And what do I mean by that? Grammatical law of Hebrew, the modern law of Hebrew says this. if you have a contraction, when you put two names together, you have to contract them. So in English, this is a contraction, right? You can say do not, or you can say don't. And the apostrophe takes the place of the O. It's just the same thing in Hebrew. In Hebrew, you have a contraction. So if you had Yahweh Almighty, you wouldn't spell it all out. You would contract the names. And when you're contracting a name in modern Hebrew, if the sacred name, Yah, comes at the beginning of the name, it takes the shortened form, Yah. And actually, it's not even Y-E, it's just the Y. It's called a sfa. I'll show you in a minute. It's two points under it, which is just the consonant. There's no vowel to it when you have a sfa. If the name comes at the end of a name, like Eliyah, right? Then you keep the name in its original form. My guess is, I don't believe it was like that in ancient times, and I got proof of it. I'm going to show you why I don't believe it. I believe because they were not using the name Yahweh, that if the name came at the beginning of a name, they contracted it so not to have Yahweh's name in a name. But this is just a modern law of Hebrew, and we'll go over a couple. NathanYah, right? Like the Prime Minister of Israel, NathanYah. So you can take that name, which means gift of Yah. And you could say Yonathan, or you could say NathanYah or NathanYahu. Why sometimes is it Yahu, and why is it sometimes Yah? Because there's people who think the name of Yahweh starts with Yahu. And they say, well, it starts with Yahu, and then you have an A, so it should be Yahuwah. Doesn't work that way. The same way they say, if you take the name Yehuda, right, the Jews, Yehuda, and Yehuda is Yod, Hey, Wav, Dalet, Hey. If you take out the Dalet, then you have Yahweh's name. And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way, because they're two different roots. Yehuda is the name, is the root word for Yada, and as we saw, the root word for Yahweh is Hayah. They're two different roots. They have nothing. You can't do that. You can't do that in English. You can't take a word like cat and say, well, if you take the word cat and you take out the C and put a B, you have the word bat. Wow. Does that mean bats come from cats? It doesn't work like that in any language. It's illogical to make those kind of comparisons. So why sometimes is there Yahu? Because who is he in Hebrew? So when the word who is in there, it's just saying Yah is he is this, he is that. It has nothing to do with how the name Yahweh is pronounced. It simply is the pronoun that's put in there with the name. So let's go to another one here. Yahron, right? This is Yahoram. Yah exalts. He was the king of Israel, Yahoram. And as you see, it's not Y-E-H. It's just a Y. Those two dots next to the Y should really be underneath them, and it's called, in Hebrew, a sfa. A sfa means it's a contraction, but there is no vowel. It's just a y. It's just a quick y sound. Yahorm. So there is no E there. It says Yahorm. It's two consonants together there. It means Yah exalts. Here's another one. Yahu. Yahu, it's an aleph at the end. Yahu, Yah is. Yehu, that's the king Yehu. So, Yehu means Yahweh is. You know, he is. Yahweh is he, you could say. Yahoshua, right? Again, in modern Hebrew, you would have a sfa underneath it, so it would be Yehoshua. Not Y-E, but just Y, and it is Yahweh, he is salvation. That's what the name means. Now, why do I believe that this is not the way it was in ancient Hebrew? Because there's something called the Marasa text. Now, again, what I'm showing you is only in the Masoretic text, meaningly, the oldest text, what I've been showing you with vowel pointing, is 1,200 years old, maximum. In this text here, this Masorah text, this is written in the poor Samaria in the 5th century BC. This is right after the temple was destroyed, right? This is the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. And in this text, take a look how the names are written. Yehoshaphat, that's the Masoretic text, the dotted one. In the Marasa, it's Yahushaphat. Yahweh, he is judge. In the Masoretic text, Yenadab. In the Masorah text, Yahunadab. Yahweh, he volunteered. And again, the who only means he. Yahweh, he. So it should be Yah, Yonadab, or Yahoshaphat. It could be the same thing. So, in this text, which is 1,300 years older than the Masoretic. They have 13 names and hundreds of times, it's a big text, all with the name Yah. And that's why I believe there's no doubt about it. We have in our Bible now, even in the Masoretic text, 68 times that they vowel point Yah as Yahweh. I want to go to Matthew 11:27, because I know if you don't understand Hebrew, some of this can be cumbersome. And I usually don't like to give messages like this, but I feel like you have to do it because you have to show people this is just grammatically how something is. But I think there's a more important point now that I want to show you also about the name being part of the restoration ministry. Matthew 11:27. Yeshua says, all things were yielded to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and the one to whom the Son purposes to reveal him. So, no one knows the Father except the Son, and whom the Son reveals him to. So now, in the restoration ministry, where Yahweh is revealing everything, including his name, there's no way on earth Yahweh would reveal his name to an anti-missionary who doesn't believe in Yeshua. It just wouldn't make sense. It would go against everything of the pattern of Yahweh. No, the restoration of the sacred name is part of Yahweh's restoration ministry, and that restoration ministry is with Yeshua's congregation. Now again, there's all different branches of that congregation, right? I always say I like to come here because this is the beginning of the sacred name branch. This is ground zero of that. And I think that Elder Sam should be honored for that, because without him, who knows where we would be today. But the point of it is that when I see people following the Messianic way or going after these Jewish anti-missionaries and following them, you just see that the Spirit of Yahweh can't be leading these people. It's simply that simple, that this is part of, I believe, probably the separation of the wheat and the chaff. Because it's a very simple thing. Everything I've showed you to this point is not conjecture. It's Hebrew grammar laws. And like I said, this isn't my opinion. I'm giving you encyclopedia after encyclopedia after scholars that are saying that there's no way you could come up with Yehovah. It's grammatically impossible in the Hebrew language. And yet there's people that are saying that they're believing that and denying the name Yahweh, the very name of the Creator. And it gets back to who has the authority for this? Who has the authority for it? John 17 and verse 6. John 17 and verse 6. John 17 and verse 6. I revealed your name to the men whom you gave to me out of the world. They were yours and you gave them to me. And they have kept your word. Now they have known that everything that you've given to me, I have given to them, and they received them. So here it's very clear that Yeshua received the name of the Father from the Father, and he's giving it to his disciples. There's nothing in here that would be non-believers in Yeshua. And this is, again, I talked a little bit last night, judicial order. It's a very simple thing, that if people were following judicial order, they would not be getting deceived like this. Because whether it's the day starts at sunrise, the Sabbath rotates by the moon, and this month it's Tuesday, next month it's Thursday, or any of the other heresies that have come up in the last few years, if you were part of a congregation of one of the end-time remnants, you would never believe that, because I don't know any elder, true elder of Yahweh, that's teaching any of that stuff. And again, Elder Sam, he's the oldest one of the elders that we have in these groups. He didn't make this stuff up. We're not learning it from Elder Sam. He's getting it from the ones before him. Elder Dodd and A.B. Training. And who did they get it from? Elder Gilbert Kramer and the ones before them. And before them, they got it from other ones. I went over this last night. My book is over here. You could take it and read the history. If they're gone, ask for one. We're happy to give it to you. But you have to understand this, that Yeshua's congregation has been there for 2,000 years. And the only way, you want to make sure you're 100% going to get deceived, go out there on your own and make your own decisions. I'm being blunt with you because I love you. But I'm telling you, this is the way it's going to happen. You are not going to stay with the truth if you're out there on your own getting all this garbage from the internet. It's that simple. Doesn't mean you should be learning every day on your own. I'm not saying not to read and to grow in the grace and knowledge of our Master Yeshua, but I'm talking about in the Laodicean era, and Laodicean means ruled by the people, we have hundreds of thousands of people that are all out there on their own. They don't meet with anyone for Sabbath services. They don't come with the body of Messiah. The only time you may see them is at the feast. And you know why? Because they're coming with their papers. And they want to hand those papers out, telling you about this new theory that Satan and Yeshua are brothers, and every other kind of crazy heresy they have. But that is not the ticket to the kingdom of Yahweh. And I'm telling you something. I teach at the Bible school something called kingdom principles. And I have human nature as much as anybody. But the reason why I surrender myself to you is because I know it's a kingdom principle. I know the only way I'm going to make it into the kingdom is if I'm part of the body, because the body goes into the kingdom. It's not an individual thing. The kingdom is collectively. And there's kingdom principles, And when you look at even democracy, maybe it's the best form of government we have in this world, but it's a bad thing. I call it demonocracy. Because democracy is simply that the majority rules. That's not a good thing. In the kingdom, you're not going to have democracy. You're going to have where everyone's mindset is the mind of Messiah. And that's what Yahweh is doing. He's taking us, corrupted human flesh, right, that has a corrupted mind. And if we will simply surrender our will to Him, He will lift us up and He will fill us up with the mind of Messiah, and we'll all think the same. Hallelujah. And it's coming. We're in the process of that. And this is why this is so important, because like I said, people that are going out to anti-missionaries and trying to come up with the name of Yahweh, you're starting way on the wrong course. You're never going to come up with the truth with going that way. A couple more things, and then maybe we could answer a few questions if we have them. Exodus 20 and verse 7. Exodus 20 and verse 7. You shall not take the name of YHWH, Yahweh, your Elohim, in vain, for Yahweh will not leave unpunished the one who takes His name in vain. So literally, the name of Yahweh is to be set apart. And that word in vain in Hebrew, it means to change, to falsify, or to make common. So, taking the name YHWH and turning it into L-O-R-D or G-O-D is definitely changing the name and falsifying the name. But also, we want to be careful that we're not making the name common. I have a friend of mine. He's a priest in Israel. He knows a lot of the top rabbis there. And he told me one time, he believes the name is Yahweh. And he said, you don't just come out and say the name Yahweh. He said, you say the Almighty Yahweh, the great. You put something, like you set His name apart. And we want to make sure that we're not making the Creator's name common. Because by making it common, meaning it's just a name that would come out of our mouth in any circumstance. So I understand our brother Judah. I don't believe their purpose for not using the name was evil. I think that after they went into captivity, and now they came back to the Promised Land, I believe that their motive was they didn't want to break this commandment, so they stopped using the name YHWH in everyday conversation. But then as time went by, they stopped reading it in Scripture, they stopped praying with the name, and literally they did the opposite. They brought it to nothing, which is part of breaking that commandment if you never use it. We know David used the name. We know he prayed to the name. So we want to use that name correctly, but we also want to make sure we keep that name apart. One comment about the name Yeshua, because if we turn to the book of Hebrews, we know that in Aramaic, they use the contracted form of Yeshua with Y-E instead of Y-A-H. And there have been a fair amount of people over the years that have left the proper name of Yeshua and went to this. But very clearly, the name Yeshua, and again, it's better than Jesus, because Jesus, to me, is just a hybrid name that means nothing. Even in Greek, Jesus has no etymology to it. It's a hybrid name. But when I tell people that ask me about the name Yeshua, Y-E-S-H-U-A, I say, well, it's better than Jesus, but at the same rate, it's just the word for salvation, but it doesn't tell you whose salvation it is. And Yahshua said very clearly, first of all, Yahweh said it in Exodus 3, that I will send my messenger before your face, and, he will come in my name. And then Yeshua said the same thing, that the Father has sent me in his name, in the name of the Father. But I think in Hebrews 1, it's very interesting what happens here, because it says in many ways, in Hebrews 1:1, and in various of old, Elohim spoke to the fathers in the prophets. And these last days he's spoken to us in the Son, whom he appointed heir of all, and by whom he made the worlds. For he is the brightness of his glory, the express image of his being, and upholding all things by the power of his word. Having made purification of our sins through himself, he sat down on the right hand of the majesty on high. There are 13 references to a throne in heaven where the Father sits, and a throne to his right where Yeshua sits. They're not the same being. I had a guy write me recently. He wrote a letter and with another heresy he was trying to bring, and he said, and if you believe that Yahweh and Yeshua are two separate beings, don't even answer me. And I go, well, I wasn't going to answer him anyway, because it would make no sense. But it's very clear. I can show you 100 scriptures. I can show you 13 direct scriptures that say right now, because when I show people, well, Yeshua's praying to his Father. How can he pray to himself? He said the Father is greater than I. How can he be? No, well, that's the earthly Yeshua. They come up with all this crazy stuff. So I say, okay, let's put all of this aside. Right now in heaven, is there a throne in heaven? Yes, there's a throne in heaven. Who's sitting on that throne? Yahweh the Father. Is there a throne next to him that somebody else is sitting on? The Bible tells us 13 times, yes. Yahweh is not stretched out on two thrones. There's a throne that the Father sits on. There's a throne in his right hand that the Son is sitting on. That's what your Bible tells you. Very, very clearly. And if Yahweh the Father and Yeshua the Son are the same being, the next question is, did Yeshua die? And if he died, who raised him up? No. Psalm 16 very clearly says, I will not leave my Messiah in the grave to see corruption. If you really understand the 300 Messianic prophecies, and I have a book out there on them, you see that it's Yahweh the Father talking about his servant, the Messiah. Yahweh is not the Messiah. His Son is the Messiah. And the Messiah comes in his name. And that's why it's important to use Yahweh's name here. And now, as we get into this, verse 4, and he, Yeshua, is altogether superior to the cherubs or angels, just as the name he has inherited is a more excellent name than theirs. What? Wow. What is he talking about? If you look at all the cherubs, Michael, right? Michael, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel. The cherubs use the generic title El, but the Son has a more excellent name. Yahshua, Yahweh's salvation. You don't get that in Yeshua. So to me, this scripture is clear proof it's not Yeshua. It's Yahshua, Yahweh's salvation, because he has a more excellent name. The family name of Yahweh is in his name. It's that simple. So I don't know why anybody that believes in the sacred name would deny that, although I've seen it. I've seen people that believed in the name Yahshua go back to using the Aramaic contract, which we don't even know if that's the original. We don't have any manuscripts from the 1st century of Aramaic. Maybe the name was Yahshua. I had people, I was saying it last night, I've had people tell me in the past, well, the sacred name is not important because the Septuagint, that's the Greek manuscripts of the Old Testament, right? In the Septuagint, they use the words theos and dios. Now, this is written in the 2nd century BC, and they're using names of pagan deities. So, why could the name be that important? What they don't understand is, well, when the Septuagint was written, they didn't use theos and dios. They used the name of Yahweh in the Paleo-Hebrew in gold letters, and I have copies of it. So it was important. Now, later on, when they kept copying them over and over again, sure, if you have a Septuagint from maybe 6th century AD, it might not have those gold letters, but the original ones did. So that's the point of it, that the name is important. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, you will see that not even in many of the scrolls did they even change to the Babylonian Hebrew, which is block Hebrew, like we're seeing a lot here. They use the Paleo Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew. So you'll see the whole text will be in Babylonian Hebrew, but the name of Yahweh kept in the original form, which shows you that name was important to them. They kept that name sanctified. And the name of the Father and the name of the Son, we should keep sanctified. I want to end on one thing. I told you how in Hebrew, originally was a pictograph language. Well, it's very interesting when you look at the pictograph of the Tetragrammaton, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Behold the hand, behold the nail. So, in the name of the Father, you see Yahweh's salvation. Behold the hand, behold the nail. And actually, when you look in your scriptures, you'll see that as Yeshua is being crucified, Pilate put a plaque on top of his crucifixion site saying, Yeshua ha-Nazarene we Melech ve Yehuduim, which would be Yod, He, Wav, He, the beginning of each sentence. And the Jews said, take it down, take it down. And what did Pilate say? What is written is written. They wanted to take it down because the Father's name was there right on his crucifixion. That was there. So amazingly, behold the hand, behold the nail, Yahweh's salvation. And you want to know something? I told you in the beginning how from Adam and Eve, they believed when Cain was born that he was the Messiah. If you take the first 10 names from Cain to Seth to Enosh, and you take the first 10 names of the genealogy in Genesis 5, it actually says, that mankind is destructive to himself, but the loving Elohim will come down out of heaven showing that his death will bring the longed-after comfort, or rest, Noah meaning rest. So they knew it. I say, how did the rabbis ever miss this? The first 10 names of the genealogy in Genesis tell the plan of salvation through the sacrifice of Yeshua. So everything, there's nothing that is hidden that Yahweh will not bring into light. And someday our brother Judah will see this. And like it says in Zechariah